Life Audio.
Welcome to the Untangling Prayer Podcast. I'm Rachel Wojo, and each week we unravel life's knots through prayer. Here you'll find practical wisdom and prayer encouragement to guide you through life's hardest seasons. Join me as we untangle life's messes together, one prayer at a time. Welcome to the Untangling Prayer Podcast. I'm Rachel, and I'm so glad you're here. Let me ask you something. What's the prayer you're too afraid to pray? That request that makes your heart race a little faster, the one you've kept tucked away because it feels too big, too impossible, or maybe you're afraid of what happens if God says no. If you immediately thought of something, you're not alone, and this episode is for you. Today, we're talking about having the courage to pray bold prayers, what I call stepping out on the water with our prayer life. I know the struggle intimately. Just last month, I drove in my car for 20 minutes wrestling with whether to pray for a specific opportunity that seemed so far beyond my reach. Who am I to ask for something this big? I thought. Maybe you've been there too. This tension between fear and faith is something I explore deeply in my latest book, Desperate Prayers, Embracing the Power of Prayer in Life's Darkest Moments. If you've ever held back from bringing your biggest dreams or deepest needs before God, this book is for you. It's filled with encouragement for those moments when prayer requires real courage. And that's our focus today. The good news, your breakthrough might be hiding behind your boldest prayer. God isn't intimidated by your requests. In fact, He's waiting for you to voice them. Together, we'll explore how courage in prayer transforms not just our circumstances, but our hearts. Let's dive in. Our first segment is Questions in Hard Places. How do I find the courage to pray for things that seem impossible or that I'm afraid to ask for? I remember sitting across my friend at a coffee shop as she confessed, I can't bring myself to pray about my marriage anymore. It feels like asking for a miracle, and I'm terrified of the disappointment. Maybe you felt that same knot in your stomach, that hesitation to voice your deepest desires to God. When it comes to prayer, sometimes the hardest part isn't finding the right words. It's finding the courage to speak them at all. We hesitate because we're afraid of disappointment, or we feel our requests are too bold, or maybe we question if we're worthy of asking for such things. I've been meditating on Psalm 34 this week. Psalm 34, 4-6 tells us, I sought the Lord, and He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to Him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. Notice that key phrase, He delivered me from all my fears. Even our fears about prayer itself. God doesn't just answer our prayers. He addresses the fear that keeps us from praying boldly in the first place. And there's more. In verse 10, we read, The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. When we seek God with our whole hearts, He promises we won't lack any good thing. That doesn't mean we get everything we want, but it does mean we can trust Him with our deepest desires. Then verse 15 assures us, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are attentive to their cry. God is paying attention. He's leaning in, eager to know what's on your heart, even those prayers you're nervous to speak aloud. So what does courageous prayer look like? It's not about volume or eloquence. It's about bringing your authentic heart to God, stepping out in faith, even when you can't see how He might answer. Just like Peter stepped out of the boat onto stormy waters, bold prayer requires us to fix our eyes on Jesus rather than on the waves of our circumstances. And here's something beautiful. God honors that kind of faith-filled risk, not because our prayers manipulate Him, but because our willingness to pray boldly reveals our trust in His character. Let's pause for a moment right now. I invite you to think of that prayer you've been hesitant to pray. Take a deep breath and whisper it to God just between you and Him. That small act of courage is the first step toward a deeper trust. Thanks for tuning in to Questions in Hard Places. We'll be right back after this brief word from our sponsors.
The ship's drifting out of control. Get out of there now.
What happened? His cord snapped. Some called it impossible.
Okay, Dave, I don't know where I am.
Others call it a miracle.
Son, no, he's not.
Focus Features presents the inspirational true story
I got an idea.
that kept the world breathless.
This isn't working.
You can do this, buddy.
Starring Woody Harrelson
Now!
and Simu Liu.
I'm not losing a diver today.
Last Breath, based on a true story. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Only in theaters this Friday.
Thank you for listening in to that word from our sponsors. And now for this week's segment of Pray More, Worry Less Encouragement. This segment is called Bold Prayers When Faith Takes a Risk. You know, there's something powerful that happens when we pray with courage. It's not just about getting the answers we want. It's about what happens in our hearts when we dare to bring our deepest longings before God. Psalm 34:15 reminds us, "The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are attentive to their cry." God isn't distant or disinterested. He's leaning in, paying attention to every word, every tear, every whispered hope. As I wrote in Desperate Prayers, God isn't intimidated by your requests or your deepest need. He's waiting for you to voice them. This truth became startlingly real to me when my daughter Taylor was diagnosed with a rare metabolic disorder that doctors said had no treatment. For weeks, I prayed safe, careful prayers asking for comfort and peace, but I avoided that bold request that was burning in my heart. And one morning, not too long after the diagnosis, I finally broke and I said, "Lord, I'm asking you to heal her completely, even though the doctors say it's impossible." That prayer terrified me because what if God said no? In that moment of raw courage, something inside me shifted. Not in Taylor's condition, but in me. I felt God's presence in a way I hadn't before, and I realized that God wanted to do so much more than give me the answers to my prayers. He wants to be the answers to our prayers. His strength, His courage, His power is all we need. Your breakthrough might be hiding behind your boldest prayer. Here are 3 ways to find courage to pray when your heart is racing. Number 1, name your fear and then pray anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Try this. Say out loud, "I'm afraid to pray for blank because blank." Fill in the blanks. I'm afraid to pray for because, and then immediately add, "But God, I'm bringing it to you anyway." Psalm 34:4 promises that when we seek Him, He delivers us from all our fears, even the fear of disappointment. And number 2, start small and pray specific. Bold prayer is a muscle that grows stronger with use. Begin with smaller, specific requests. And when you begin to see God's hand clearly, you'll feel fortified. I remember when my son missed the school bus, and I prayed specifically that a friend would be able to offer a ride. And when that exact answer came, it built my faith for bigger prayers, bigger requests. Each answered prayer was evidence for the next bold request. And then number 3, surrender the outcome. Jesus modeled this perfectly. "Not my will, but yours be done." This wasn't Him backing down from a bold request. It actually required more courage. It was Jesus trusting His Father's heart completely. Pray with specific needs and with specific passion, and then add, "Lord, I trust your answer," whatever it is. It's not a prayer disclaimer. It's the ultimate expression of faith. Let's practice it together for a moment. Think of that bold prayer that you have again and take a deep breath and pray with me. Father, I bring this request before you with courage, believing you are good no matter how you answer. I surrender the outcome to you. Amen. In a world that celebrates self-reliance, bold prayer is a radical act of dependence. It declares, I cannot, but God can. And that declaration, that humility wrapped in courage, is precisely what moves God's heart. This week, reflect on these questions. What prayer have I been hesitant to bring before God, and why? What's the smallest step of boldness I can take today in my prayer life? And how might God be growing my faith through the very process of learning to pray courageously? Remember this as you go about your week. Your boldest prayers reveal your deepest trust, and that trust is the currency of your relationship with God. Thanks for tuning in, and now to share this week's answered prayer story, which I'm calling Perfect to the Pound. When we step out in faith with our prayers, sometimes God answers in ways so precise that it leaves fingerprints of divine involvement all over our lives. And this happened to me just this week in such a remarkable way that even an airport employee couldn't deny something unusual had happened. The story took place at the Christian Product Expo last week. For those who don't know, this is a major conference where authors, publishers, and retailers connect. Preparing for this event for me meant a significant investment, not just financially with conference fees and travel costs, but it meant time away from my family, from my girls with homeschooling, and bringing dozens of books to share with people that I would meet. I was the little girl who used to throw up every year the night before or first day of church camp. And as I packed for this trip to Christian Product Expo, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety. Was this whole effort going to be worthwhile? Was I being a good steward of our family's resources? These questions led me to a prayer that felt small but required real faith. Lord, I don't want to take any more books that I'm supposed to. Help me bring exactly the right number, not one too many, not one too few, and guide me to give them to precisely the people you want to receive them. It might sound like a really simple prayer, but it came from a deep place of longing to be faithful with what God has entrusted to me. This ministry matters deeply to me, and I really wanted every book to be in the right hands. I had to pay $150 for an extra bag just to get all my books to the conference. And through the 4 days, I carefully followed God's nudges about who to give books to, feeling prompted to share with people that I barely even knew, didn't know, in fact. When the conference ended, I faced a very practical dilemma. I didn't want to pay that extra baggage fee on the return trip. So I used what I call the nesting technique, packing smaller suitcases inside larger ones to consolidate everything into just 2. With no way to weigh my baggage at the resort, I had to guess. My heart was pounding as I approached the airport check-in because the suitcases were heavy. And when the sky cap weighed my first suitcase, he looked up with that expression we all dread. You're 4 pounds over. My stomach dropped, and I could feel the flush of anxiety washing over my face. What am I going to do? Calculating the extra fee in my head. The sky cap then suggested, let's weigh your other suitcase and see if you can move some things around. So I knelt on the concrete, unzipped that overweight suitcase while praying, Lord, help me. I tried to be faithful. My fingers were almost trembling as I pulled out 5 books and transferred them to the other bag. The sky cap weighed the first suitcase again, exactly 50 pounds. Then the second, also exactly 50 pounds. Not 49.9, not 50.1, exactly 50 pounds, the maximum allowed weight. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ma'am, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I have never seen this happen before, he said. In that moment, I felt God whisper to my heart, you gave every book you were supposed to, and you're bringing exactly home what you're supposed to. It was such a sweet moment of affirmation that the God who counts the stars counted my books down to the precise pound. This experience last week taught me something powerful about bold prayer. Nothing is too big or too specific to bring before God. What started as a seemingly mundane prayer about luggage weight became a profound reminder that God cares about the details of our lives. When I prayed about those books, I was taking a risk, asking for specific guidance in what might seem like a very trivial matter. But God showed up in such a precise way that it strengthened my faith to pray even more boldly about other things in my life. If you're hesitating to bring certain prayers before God because they seem too detailed or too everyday, remember the God who measures luggage to the exact pound is certainly attentive to the deepest desires of your heart. I'd love to hear your story of a time God answered a bold prayer in your life. Share it on social media with the hashtag #UntanglingPrayer, and we'll celebrate God's faithfulness together, or email it to me at rachel@rachelwojo.com. As we've seen with the recent national prayer gatherings in Washington, D.C. that drew over 100,000 people, there's a growing hunger for bold, expectant prayer across our nation. Your individual courage to pray boldly adds to this movement of faith that is sweeping across communities and could be the catalyst to start revival right where you are. This story of answered prayer is similar to many testimonies I share in my new book, Desperate Prayers, Embracing the Power of Prayer in Life's Darkest Moments. If you're in a season where you're wondering if God hears you, this book may offer some comfort. Desperate Prayers is available now. The ebook and audiobook of Desperate Prayers is available as well. Order your copy at desperateprayers.com or wherever you buy books. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Untangling Prayer. Remember, God sees you, He hears you, and He knows your need. Thanks for joining me on the Untangling Prayer podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who could use a little hope. And be sure to subscribe for more. Until next time, keep seeking, keep trusting, and keep praying.
The ship's drifting out of control. Get out of there now.
What happened?
His cord snapped. Some called it impossible.
Okay, Dave, I don't know where I am.
Others call it a miracle.
Son, no, he's not.
Focus Features presents the inspirational true story
I got an idea.
that kept the world breathless.
This isn't working.
You can do this, buddy.
Starring Woody Harrelson
Now!
and Simu Liu.
I'm not losing a diver today.
Last Breath, based on a true story. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Only in theaters this Friday.